So I want to have a bit of fun now and talk about, there's all these different kinds of mindfulness, but there's many kind of shenanigans going on. I love that word, don't you? So one of the shenanigans is that science is being used in simplistic ways that perhaps oversell the benefits and the complexity of this experience. So the brain, the neuroscience, is one area where this is really happening. So this incredibly complex phenomena that's being researched as best we can with the technology we've got so far is really, the mindfulness literature has a tendency to really dumb it down and make it into kind of simplistic models in order to tell 8-year-olds about it, to tell high-stressed workers about it. We want to do this really quickly and simply. What are the problems that comes with some of these metaphors? And I'm sure all of us have used these metaphors in teaching people mindfulness. Just add a few tools to your toolbox, or, you know, train your brain. I've certainly used them because it kind of makes sense to people, huh? It's just like doing your biceps, just, you know, train your old brain. All good, except maybe, I think it really gives some wrong expectations. So this is the straight line of progress, huh? You train your brain, you train your arm, and you get stronger, and it gets sort of, you know, you get more resilient and you get more grounded and you don't yell at your kids as much and it's all a beautiful straight line. Really? What about the pragmatic, experiential, lived reality? I call this the wiggly line of disendarkenment. And I'm sure if you've practiced mindfulness more than a week, you know about the wiggly line of disendarkenment, that actually, really? Things come up. It's not this kind of, it's a profound undertaking of grappling with existential realities, and we're getting derailed all the time. And the disendarkenment term, I want to honour Patrick Kearney. He's a meditation teacher who comes to Perth, actually, runs Vipassana meditation retreats. If you ever can catch a retreat with him, he's really good value. So some scientists have got together and written this article recently, which I consider part of the backlash that's happening about mindfulness because of this oversimplification. And, you know, things do arise and pass, so we're part of that. But some very serious, smart people who are deeply immersed in the practice and also deeply immersed in their field as neuroscientists have written this article. And, have a read of it. They're really challenging some of these simplistic ways of and what the research is actually showing. I actually think they've kind of gone overboard in their rigour, but I'm a practitioner who, you know, wants to get people to come and do courses because I think they're profoundly helpful for people. So, but I think we need to pay attention to this and know about it as practitioners and be careful. So this is from Willoughby Britton. She's a researcher in the States, an MBSR teacher, and she just offers us this really simple way if we're speaking about our courses, that we use this kind of open-ended, flexible and very specific language rather than the reifying kind of, this is going to cure, it's proved, it's this, but actually softer, huh? This, you know, this may indicate it's associated with. Some forms of meditation can help, you know, some kinds of anxiety and depression. Just being a bit humble, I think that's beautiful. And also, because the studies are done on populations of people, we can't promise any individual with anxiety that in 8 weeks it's actually going to be that different. So it depends on so many causes and conditions, that transformation. So yeah, I think it's just wise to be a bit humble and communicate in this way. The other thing we need to do is define the offering. So another article that you might want to check out, if you haven't already, by some experts in the field in terms of the science and also the Dharma, the kind of Buddhist psychology aspect of things. And they've been interested in this question because there's so many different kinds of programs. What defines mindfulness-based programs? And they also do a little bit of an analysis of where the science is up to in terms of maturity. And so these are some of the things they've said about what defines mindfulness-based programs. So it draws on contemplative traditions and science. underpinned by a model of human experience which addresses the cause of human distress and the pathways to relieving it. Now that's really pointing to Buddhist psychology. It has this new relationship with experience, this approach orientation, decentering. I mean, stuff you guys will just resonate with and know. Develops, as well as attentional, emotional, behavioural self-regulation, it's also cultivating wisdom, compassion, equanimity, these other qualities, very important in mindfulness-based programs. And it involves a sustained intensive training in mindfulness meditation. And I think that's quite a important kind of distinguishing element. And just to get clear about maybe mindfulness-based involves that kind of meditative training for people, and mindfulness-informed maybe doesn't have all these aspects. And for us as practitioners of this and teachers of this, that we're aware of those distinctions and know what we're offering and know what we're inviting people into. And I think the level of teacher training required if you are actually inviting people into longer practice, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, is quite different than if you're doing 5 minutes of practice or a bit of mindful walking, or, you know, I think it's quite different in terms of what you have to know and embody. So, the second shenanigan, the media loves lists and one-liners and thin white women. The media loves looking at thin white women, doesn't like talking to them, but it actually really likes talking to, the slides are missing, but the slide is, the media also loves chunky, older, robed men. And it loves talking to them. They're kind of the holders of wisdom, unlike these thin white women. This is courtesy of Nicholas Van Dam, a colleague in Melbourne who's a neuroscientist dude. So we all know who this is. Matthew Ricard, 69-year-old, says, look, you know, happiest man in the world, the secret's just 15 minutes a day thinking kind of happy thoughts. We've got to read the fine print. So you can start by thinking those happy thoughts, very good. And if you practice for 50 years, like Matthew has, very good, you can become very happy. You also need to be born into a very privileged, educated, loving family, a father who's a remarkable philosopher, a mother who's a brilliant painter and an ex-Buddhist nun. And probably you could get a PhD under the guidance of a Nobel laureate and train and live with the Dalai Lama for 50 years. Tick, done. Brilliant, let's do it. Easy. So the third shenanigans is about the illusion of choice. So I think a lot of interventions are being offered in the mindfulness world at the moment, which are about letting people escape from their aversion. So, you don't like the body scan? Just do the awareness of breath. You don't like doing it for 30 minutes? Just do it for 10 minutes. Just do a bit of mindful walking if that pisses you off, do whatever, And sure, any bit of practice for some people is gold. Like, it absolutely needs to be titrated for who is there in the room with you and what they are up for, what they've signed up for. This is absolute, and many people can use practice like that. But if people are up against it, if they are really stressed, relationship breakdown, anxiety, depression, loss, grief, financial worries, they actually are probably going to need more practice than that. So for us to occupy this space where we're offering all this choice is just training in aversion. It's training people to avoid their pain, which is not a mindfulness-based or a mindfulness-informed kind of practice. So my niece, and it raises this question of does mindfulness work, right? My niece, when she was 12, we went down to Margaret River for Christmas and she got this surfboard, right? So she takes the surfboard. It wasn't a very big day that day, so it was lucky. She goes out, 10 minutes later, comes back, throws it down on the ground. It doesn't work, right? The surfboard doesn't work, damn it. And I hear this about mindfulness, and then you inquire a little bit about what actual practice people have done or what context it was offered in, or, and it's not going to work, right? Just like the surfboard can't. It's actually a very nuanced and tender thing to engage in a practice, I think, and needs care, needs time. You can't just kind of add it to a busy life, maybe, if you're really under the pump. So whether it works or not depends on intention and invested time, and apps are going to be a great start for some people. But again, if you're really got some serious suffering going on, you're probably going to have to do more. And if you want to know the nature of reality, you're probably going to have to do even more, like that dude on the right side. So the question is, for what? Does it work for what? And I think that's a brilliant question for us to keep in mind. I think there's some ongoing confusion about mindfulness and meditation. So in the way I think about this, there's formal practice, which I would call mindfulness meditation, and then there's informal practice, which is applying present moment attention to whatever you're doing, working, cooking, showering, walking, beautiful. And both are enormously important from the Buddhist psychology point of view. But what's happening now is mindfulness is kind of being talked about as if it's nothing to do with meditation. And I think, again, like that illusion of choice, I think it's like, say I had a bad back and someone said, oh, you really should do Pilates, but don't bother going to a teacher and actually doing classes and learning how to reorganise your interoception so you know something about your legs and your muscles and how to pick up your kid. Don't bother doing any of that formal training in it. Just do everyday Pilates. So when you pick up your kid, just make sure that you're activating those core muscles and not those other muscles. And really? I just don't think we're up for that. I don't think, and my experience of teaching people is people can't do that unless they really spend a little bit of time dropping into the actual practice and learning movements of mind, learning how their mind, really investigating the patterns of their sensations, emotions, thoughts, and how they kind of create and contribute to the kind of stuckness that we get into as humans. So I think of mindfulness, if we're teaching mindfulness, then mindfulness is a kind of adjective. Mindfulness meditation as opposed to, Vedantic meditation or, and the formal practice leads to more awareness in our daily life. We really start noticing what increases and decreases suffering personally for us, not some theoretical abstract thing. And then we have more choices and we probably feel more inclined to practice because we go, oh, phew, this has really helped. I'm going to keep doing this as part of my life. So a fifth shenanigans is, I think, and this is happening just because it's going to happen in any field, but a lot of people with very little experience or training in mindfulness practice and applications are becoming experts. And I think this happens in two contexts. It happens in the context of people just doing a really short course, like a weekend, and then, adding that tool to their toolbox as a clinician or practitioner or teacher or whatever. And there can be some real benefit in that. Lots of the things can just be added to a portfolio of things that you do. But I think it's a real problem to consider yourself an expert, or that you're actually... I think we need to make a relationship with the traditions about what it takes to really know this stuff. And certainly if you're leading people in any form of practice, you need to actually do more training than that. I have a lot of health professionals, wonderful, open-hearted people who come to even the 8-week MBSR course, which is just a training in mindfulness. And, people so often say, yeah, I've been teaching mindfulness for years with my clients and stuff, and they find it very difficult to sit for 30 minutes and paying attention to their own mind. They find that really aversive and horrible. So it's hard unless you can know your own mind and can sit with your own aversion to invite people into that. It's just not going to be possible. You're going to be doing that illusion of choice thing. Oh, don't worry, I know it's horrible. Don't bother doing it. Really? So the other context this is happening, and a colleague, Paul Grossman, who's a researcher, he says this is happening in universities all over the world, that people get to do a PhD in mindfulness with no practice. And so they are shaping the field. Then they're going to become a supervisor and be able to supervise other people doing PhDs in mindfulness with no practice particularly, or that's a problem. If we think of those three paradigms, I think we all have to be, I'm never going to be that interested in science actually, it's just not an interest of mine, except in the thing that it supports what I love teaching, and it supports me thinking, okay, this is valuable for me, but I need to be a little bit across it. I need to be across the paradigms, and I think we all need to know something about Buddhist psychology and the practice if we're teaching this stuff seriously, and we certainly want to even have mindfulness teacher or using this in your work. I think you've got to immerse yourself a bit to be responsible for trajectory of this precious offering in the world. If we look at Buddhisms, there's many sorts. This is really sort of chunking it down. So there's a focus in some sorts of Buddhisms, Zen and Tibetan particularly, on this present moment focused view of mindfulness. And there's people in the room who are much better placed to talk about that than me, but so that this idea that sudden transformation, realisation is possible if we just abide in the present moment. All qualities of awakening are present in ordinary minds. They're available, accessible, very democratic actually, beautiful sensibility. Mindfulness involves present moment awareness. That's what you need to kind of abide in. Mindfulness involves non-judgmental quality of mind. And there's an emphasis on non-conceptual knowing. So John Kabat-Zinn was very immersed in Zen practice as well as Theravadan practice. So I think we've all been shaped by this idea of the present moment as being a doorway and a gateway. Where it gets confusing, I think, is, and it tips into that idea of, you know, the illusion of choice or just doing everyday mindfulness, is that these present moment dudes, you know, were practicing their butts off in the present moment. It's not like they were just going, oh, I'll just be in the present moment, that'll do something for me. Very important, that's essential, but the formal practice is also important. So on the cultivation over time focus, the constructivist tradition, there's an emphasis on the gradual development over time leads to transformation. Special qualities of mind get created through the practice, get developed. They're not already just there. Mindfulness involves remembering and recollecting past experiencing and deliberately shaping future experiences. So really making active choices in your practice, and not just non-conceptual, right? But actually reflecting. And mindfulness meditation practice involves discerning, comparing, analyse, reflecting on practice experience. So very different kind of emphasis. And an emphasis on the use of concepts to cultivate awakening. So this is important for us if we're wanting to occupy a place of holding this tradition, contributing to the development of it, I think. You know, for many practitioners and mindfulness teachers it may not be so important, but I think just getting fine about that, because I think there's some confusion about it, and certainly if you're teaching people practice, like longer practices, or if you're leading retreats, this confusion's going to come up for your participants unless you're across it and kind of, you know, can listen to it and can hear it. And I've been involved with Dr. Maura Kinney. She's an MBCT expert in Australia, and she and I have written a paper about this that I'll make sure it's available through Ron if you want to read about the kind of importance of this for ordinary mindfulness teachers, to just have a handle on this. And it's often why the training of mindfulness teachers gets a bit perplexing. There's this tension going on all the time about how do you answer that practice question? How do you respond to it? Where's the person coming from? What's going to be most important? I just came across this other fantastic article by Sebastian Voros, and I can also make that available to you, about this very thing. So if you're interested. So the other shenanigans is just, well, it's just a dilemma for us, I think. How do we, if we care about this thing, how can we bring it forth so it's not just business as usual and it can actually contribute to changing the social relations? I think, as Ron said, it has power to do this in our schools, in our communities, in our business communities, but how do we contribute in a way that that can happen? And I just wanted to land here and maybe having a moment to connect with our own compelling reasons for being interested in this. And just orient maybe to our own basic goodness. I think we're all probably here very interested in how to catalyse greater wisdom and compassion in our worlds, in our culture, in our families. And I've just thrown out some questions that we'll just let land, and then maybe we'll open up to questions from you guys. Just what qualifies as adequate teacher training for different contexts, and it probably is quite different. Is the teacher having experiential understanding of mindfulness through practice and retreats, not just conceptual understanding? Is this an important standard for our work or not? How do we communicate ethically, precisely and effectively about the benefits of mindfulness practice? The market demands skew us away from that, I think. But it's an important question. Is mindfulness being used to describe programs that are more accurately defined as social emotional leadership programs? I think there's quite a lot of offerings now that are adding the mindfulness word to it because it's kind of a bit famous and there's all this neuroscience, but they actually don't teach practice. They don't really refer to any of the kind of underpinnings or, you know, so I think that's an interesting question for us to really get clearer and, yeah, why are we using that word? You might just call it attentional training, in fact. A lot of the research these days that university students are doing is, really, because they've got such constraints, they're really just attentional training things, not so much to do with the whole body of mindfulness. How do we contribute so these mindfulness programs are reaching the people that most need them and are empowering rather than re-traumatising? There's a whole storm at the moment about that. How do we be honest about what is needed in terms of the kind of group, the teacher, the practice to meet serious needs and intentions? So it's different, I think, for different contexts, what is actually required, and we shouldn't be, we've got to be honest about that because otherwise it's not going to work for them. Are we paying attention to the things that matter? Personal success, ease, attractiveness versus inequity, democracy, climate change, food and water sustainability. Sometimes I think, why am I even interested in this? I should just be being an activist, really, because it's going to hell in a handbasket and we need to act. And this is my particular flavour of things. What if mindfulness could be more about intimacy with this life and clearer responsibility for my place in things, rather than inhibiting my amygdala or being more productive? Yeehaw! I love that quote. I just discovered this writer. She's beautiful.